Well, Friday night, I was out at Wilbur Park and I had actually hit traffic jam coming back. I was worried I wasn't going to make it in time.
Well, hey, happy Pumpkin Man weekend.
That's right.
Yeah, it's such a good weekend here as far as triathlon. I'm I was just telling Marie that I was a little jealous that I'm not racing tomorrow because Pumpkin Man's my favorite race
Oh,
of the
it's,
year.
yeah.
And then she said to me, "But isn't 70.3 Worlds the favorite race of the year?" I'm like, "Well,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
I guess it kind of is."
yeah,
So I
yeah.
can't feel too sorry for myself that I'm not racing tomorrow.
That's
You
right.
are racing. You're racing tomorrow, though, right?
I'm racing tomorrow, and yeah, I love Pumpkin Man, and I may have only missed one in I don't know since when, but in fact, I used to go to a conference that was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and it had a Saturday afternoon program, and I actually 2 years in a row, I actually flew back, did Pumpkin Man. I flew back Friday night, did Pumpkin Man Saturday morning, then jumped back on a plane, get back to the conference.
I mean, that tells you something, right? That tells you how good of a race it
That's right,
is.
and nobody knew that I was gone, and it was like perfect. So,
Yeah, that's honestly, that's awesome. You know, it's funny because anyone that asks me about like, even from out of town, like, hey, like, what's the best race to do in Las Vegas? I always tell them Pumpkin
yeah,
Man.
yeah,
And but then I also tell them it's the hardest sprint
yeah.
race you'll
That's right.
probably ever do.
That's right.
If you do the sprint, actually, it's the hardest Olympic race probably you'll ever do too.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's what makes it enjoyable
Oh,
to me is like it's challenging, it's
mm-hmm.
tough.
Yeah.
And I mean for a sprint race especially, it will push you,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
now we've added the extra mile run uphill.
Yeah, that's right, coming out of the swim. Well, they're moving transition down
Oh, they
on the
are.
road. Yeah, so this is what I was told. I didn't look at I didn't double check, but
Uh-oh.
I don't think we need to run all the way up to the top.
Oh, okay.
So we're just going to do the normal transition area. So still,
Oh,
that's a half
well,
mile
now
run.
I need to go to Wilbur Park and sign up.
There you go.
It was that run I didn't want to do up the hill.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Pumpkin Man is just iconic around here, and for the reasons that you mentioned. One, it's a real hard sprint race, which is part of the fun, and then you end up in a beautiful park in Boulder City.
Yep,
Typically, the weather is fantastic. It's going to be a little windy tomorrow, but
yep.
it's usually just a great place to sort of hang out. Most people are wrapping up their season, coming through Pumpkin Man. I think more recently there's more fall races that are going deeper into November and December, but mostly ends up signaling the end of the triathlon season for us.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also it's like, the Las Vegas Triathlon is traditionally pretty dang hot still.
Yeah, yeah,
And just 3 weeks later, or is it 4 weeks? Three,
yeah.
4 weeks later, the weather's always
I
just
know.
just better.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's usually not windy
Hmm.
this time of year. Just it happens to be the one day in the
Yeah.
month like it's going to be windy tomorrow. But no, and then the lake temperature is perfect too at this
Yeah.
time, right? Like it's
Hmm.
just wetsuit legal.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of your choice. Like you could easily not wear a wetsuit. You could
Yeah.
wear one, whatever you want.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's pretty special. You know, I know we're marketing for them here a little
Yeah.
bit,
Right. Right. That's what it's.
but it's a great race,
Yeah,
and
and it's a unique race because it is point to point. So you have two transitions, which adds just a little uniqueness to the whole event. And so it's yeah, it's just fun.
yeah. So the question that it keeps coming year after year, and people have asked me many times, is tri bike or road bike
Try bike all the way.
all the way.
That's
That's
right.
that's what I tell people. I'm like,
Yeah,
well, first of all, you own a tri bike,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and there is a section that aero does really matter, especially if you get a south wind.
Yep, yep. Which is
And
going to be tomorrow.
yeah, so always try to try a bike there,
Hmm.
but I would really honestly, and I keep telling myself I need to do it. I need to do a test
Hmm.
where I go the same watts,
Yep.
and I've run it on best bike split. It's
Hmm.
not there. I can't find any difference really,
Right, right.
honestly.
Hmm.
But I'd like to run a test on myself, like just, do 200 watts average power both times
Yep.
and just see
Hmm.
one's
Hmm.
faster.
Yeah, right, right.
So
Well, and the people will say road bike for two reasons. One is the weight. Uh, a road bike will tend to be lighter than a time trial bike or triathlon bike, and then the position for climbing. But really, well, for me, I climb out of the saddle, so the position doesn't really
it
matter
doesn't make a
that
difference.
much. Oh,
Yeah.
I'll be most of the time out of the saddle going up that hill,
Yeah.
and sit when the heart starts to get a little tired.
Okay. Rear disc wheel or no?
I did put the disc on then. I did think about it, but I did end up putting it on because the way the wind is blowing, it's
Yeah.
going to be almost a straight head on coming back
Yeah.
as you head towards River Mountain Loop portion of the
Yeah.
course.
And we are going to change our evidence-based triathlete show to always ride a disc show.
That's right. Or I'll get the super deep head.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, it's that's the gear I race in, and I'm I'll race in that tomorrow. So my
Awesome.
tri bike is a little bit heavier, but that's what I ride, and that's what I'm used to riding. I
Yeah,
don't ride. I don't have a good road bike. Yeah.
I agree. I have a good road bike and I'd still ride the triathlon bike. Yeah.
I'm just
So,
hoping for a really rough swim. I'm hoping that swim doesn't get canceled. I hope it's wavy.
you want white caps
I
and
want it all. That's right. That's right. But if the winds are going to be what they are, there's a chance that they may have to cancel. Not necessarily for the conditions of the water for the swimmers, more so for the swim support, the kayakers and whoever's out there, because they can get blown away and then they can't help anybody. So
yeah, well, especially the kayaks. So you get those people on really light kayaks
yeah.
and they can't do anything
Hmm.
if it's windy. You're absolutely right. And paddle boards too.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Hey, I'm going to be doing swim support for St. George 70.3 the next weekend. And
Yep.
what's interesting, I got a message that they actually are going to do a kayak test of everybody too. So who's doing swim support? So they want people who are comfortable being in a kayak. So that's
Well,
good.
it's kind of important, don't you think?
It
Like,
is.
if
Yeah.
someone's going to be like hanging on to the
Yeah.
side of your kayak or
Yeah.
in trouble and you aren't good enough to control your own kayak,
That's the problem.
that is a
Mhm.
problem. It's actually interesting that they're doing that. Did they do that at Kona? Did
They
they?
did not. They did not.
Maybe something happened at Kona.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. I wonder if it happened at one of the previous 70.3s.
Yeah.
But you need to have good swim support people, and yeah,
Yeah.
knowing how to move in the kayak, how to move on a paddleboard, whatever it is. I'm not a great paddleboarder, but I can knee on it and I can sit on it. That's good. And my paddleboard did have a leak, so that was a
Oh,
problem.
oh, it did?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't tell you that? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So I go out on the at Kona, and I'm out in the water, and it's starting to feel a little soft. And I'm like, what are all these bubbles around my kayak for? And lo and behold, I had a little pinhole puncture. So I'd get about hour and a half, 2 hours on a full pump. So I had to go back in and pump out because we were out there for about 4 hours
Wow.
on the water.
So now that everybody's back from Kona,
Yeah.
now we can talk. Maybe it was that little shark you saw.
Oh yeah, yeah, right. Uh,
You got a little nibble.
I'll still say it was a shark, but I don't think it was a shark. So
We'll say it's a shark. So
yeah.
lots of racing this weekend. So we got Ironman California. Lots of
Yep.
people heading to there. Wish
That's
them
Sunday.
nothing but the best. The weather looks amazing.
No bomb cyclone this
No
year.
bomb cyclone. Still, that bothers me.
The next day was beautiful.
The next day was beautiful. There's something about like that. I think what really still bothers me about that is we made it all the way to the
Yeah,
start.
right.
Like
Right.
we're ready.
Hmm.
Like that morning you wake up and it's like, man, this is going to be a horrendous day.
Hmm.
And because like if it gets canceled like a week before, and during the COVID time, like
Yep.
they were getting canceled left and right, but we really thought that, hey,
Yeah.
we're gonna race. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I wasted a lot of money on rain gear.
Yeah. You'll use it again someday, but
It's funny, I haven't
oh.
because
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
literally haven't had the chance. But anyways, yeah, I hope that's goes good for people. I'm concerned a little bit about the water level at California because
Oh,
the
really?
river's running really low.
Mm.
Because they literally has not rained there since the bomb cyclone
Okay.
a year ago.
Yeah. Wow.
And so we'll see what ends up happening. I know that they're going to race. That's what I've heard. But when it gets low like that, it can get really fast.
Yeah.
Which for some people, that's a really good thing.
Yeah. Right. Right. Well,
And yes, but I think we have quite a few people from the club going up.
Yeah, there's I don't know. I got to put everyone in my tracker,
Yeah.
but it's a pretty good group as I've seen from Facebook. So
Yeah, well, awesome. Good luck to them. There's also a race in Southern Utah this weekend. Um, I was actually at REI that last weekend, and there was a flyer up for the Southern Utah Triathlon, which
Oh,
is this weekend in St. George or in
oh,
St. George.
really?
And I was like, well, that kind of is crummy that same weekend as Pumpkin Man, because there'd be a lot of people. Like if it was
Yeah,
a
yeah,
week ago,
great.
people would have went.
Is it a club event or
There was a flyer at like literally at REI, and I was like, "Wow,
interesting?
that's interesting." But like once again, I would never consider doing it because it's Pumpkin Man weekend.
Yeah, and that's interesting. But yeah, if I'm a local club and I know there's a lot of people coming in for World Championship, maybe it'd be fun to do a race the week before and
Yeah,
capture
maybe
some
that's
of
what
the
it is,
people. Yeah,
because I think you get a lot of people,
yeah.
if they're out there training or whatever. That's
Hmm.
true. Yeah. When
I
you
s
think about it, I mean, check-in starts on Monday,
Yeah, yeah, right.
so people
Well,
will be there.
it's a Friday Saturday
Yeah,
race, so
yeah.
yeah, I saw someone post a picture of their broken rear derailleur cage. Actually, it was the frame. It wasn't even
Oh,
the
that was flying there.
yeah, yeah.
Yikes.
So
But at least they got a lot of time, right? Like
yeah.
you get a week. If you get a week, you could probably get yourself fixed up.
Hmm.
It's not like you're there 2 days before
I think they need a whole nother bike though. I think it's the frame.
oh, it was the frame.
Yeah, yeah. It's a Cervelo, one of the earlier models, and it had so the whole
Yikes.
yeah. Let's plug one more race. It's
Yep.
the Las Vegas Triathlon Kids event,
Yep.
which is next weekend, the 28th as well. And so that's neat. Uh,
Yep.
and they usually do a great job of drawing kids in for that event. So
Yeah. And honestly, we need more kids in
yeah,
triathlon. And so I think it's fabulous. And it's low key, but it's exciting, and yeah, it's safe.
yeah,
Oh, I think that's good. There's lots going on still.
yeah, that,
The season, the season can almost never end nowadays. I mean,
yeah.
especially down here in the Southwest. I mean, you're racing all the way into December.
I know. And then we turn
Um,
around, we got Oceanside in April.
yeah. And then there's racing even before that if you want to go to
Yeah.
California and
Hmm.
race. And so it can be a very short, very short off season.
We should probably come back and revisit that topic again and talk about off season. So,
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about it tonight,
okay.
and we're going to talk about tendons tonight,
Hmm.
and tendons need an off season.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Time to heal.
Time to heal. So, you were asking me earlier what we wanted to talk about tonight, and I really was thinking about tendons. It's something we haven't talked much about. But I think that a lot of people have, a lot of triathletes, a lot of endurance athletes have issues with tendons.
Hmm.
Achilles, patella tendon, hip flexor tendons, hamstring tendons, tendons in their shoulders, rotator cuff tendons. Even some people will consider like the plantar fascia sort of a tendon. And I wanted to talk about what a tendon is, how it becomes injured, and potentially how we can fix it and or avoid it getting injured. So there's a lot to kind of unpack today.
Oh, this is
So
great. Everyone should know this is your area of expertise in terms of anatomy, physiology, injury mechanisms, and rehabilitation. So this is great.
yeah, it's funny because this is what I taught in class
Yeah.
in classes this week. I probably should be charging people
Yeah.
tuition
Right.
for this, but so John, when I say the word tendon, what does it mean to you?
Well, that I was actually going to get you to start there is even define what a tendon is and versus a ligament
Yep.
versus, the muscle. So why don't you go ahead and start?
Yep. So a tendon is actually it's a really interesting thing in our body, in that it joins the muscle to the bone, and it's the link between the muscle and the bone. And if you think about it, it acts like a rope. And the muscle, if we think about let's say you're hooking a rope up to a boat and you're pulling the boat, right? Well, you pulling is your muscles, then you have the rope, which is the tendon, and the boat is the bone. And so you're pulling it. And what a tendon can't do, like a rope, is you can't push it, right? If I push it, it does nothing. So tendons only work by pulling. And if you think about it, the word tendon always think of the word tension. So there needs to be tension applied to it, and that tension applied to it will, by the muscle, will move a bone. And this is how we ambulate. This is how we do whatever we want to do, right? We send a message from our brain through nerves to our muscles. The muscles contract, and they put tension on tendons. The tendons move the bones. So
Okay.
that in a nutshell is what a tendon is.
No, that's great. That's a perfect explanation. So distinguish that from a ligament.
Yep. So a ligament is really interesting because they actually histologically, or when we look at them under a microscope, they actually look very similar. And it's interesting, we can actually take a tendon and reconstruct a knee, for example, like an ACL, which is a ligament. We can actually take a tendon and basically turn it into a ligament. It takes a while for the body to do that, but they're so close that they're, as far as like what they look like, and somehow they function, but they're different. And what a ligament is a ligament is joins bone to bone. So if you think about it, when we're talking about joining bone to bone, bones move upon each other at joints, right? So like your knee joint it's a bone, it's your femur, and it's your femur sitting on top of your tibia, and it can naturally move by flexing, by bending, right? Well, that's a good normal movement. But what a ligament does is it prevents it moving too much, or moving moving too much, or the bone separating too much. So think of the ligament as, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. It's kind of like a safety mechanism, right? So your knee's supposed to go this way, right? Flex, it's not supposed to go this way. And it's
on my trailer.
Exactly. And so if I go the wrong way, even a little bit, it's the ligament that stops you. Now, the thing with it is, eventually, if you push too hard going the wrong way, the ligament will tear. Okay, so ligaments join bone to bone, prevent unwanted movement or excessive movement in the wrong direction.
Got it.
Of bone on bone. And so when we injure a ligament, we call it a sprain. So that's the common terminology. When we injure a tendon, we call it a strain, which is kind of an interesting thing, right? Sprain and strain, and people, lay people often use those as synonyms. But in the medical world, we differentiate those two injuries that way.
Oh, I love that. So yeah, and you probably, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard when people say they break their ankle or they broke their
Oh, no, what really is like, oh, I strained my ligament. I'm like, you didn't.
There you go. All right.
Or I sprained my tendon. The same thing. It's like, no, you didn't.
Yeah. So injuries, but you get injured in a tendon. Talk about the different injuries that you end up seeing, or what names you even put on some of those injuries.
Yeah. So this is such a fun topic, because another chalkboard irking thing is this term called tendonitis.
Oh.
And so the suffix itis means inflammation. And when we injure a tendon, in particular, when we injure tendons in endurance sports, it's almost never an itis. So it's not inflammation. It's, if anything, it's lack of inflammation in the area. And we'll get into that. So we actually are calling these things tendinopathies. So opathy basically means there's a pathology or a pathologic degradation of the tendon. So the easiest way to think about a tendon injury is let's go to that rope analogy. Okay, if the rope is frayed a little bit, okay, it has a little bit less strength, but still works, right? So, and I think that an easy one to think about is people with their Achilles, because that's a pretty common one for people to have injured. Well, with an Achilles tendon or tendinopathy, the rope is still there, and you can still run, you can still jump. It just hurts, right? And the easiest analogy I can think of is that the little fraying part. So the little bit of the frayed rope is basically damaged tendon, and that damaged tendon, it sends basically messages to the brain through nerves that says, hey, you know what? I don't like that. Like, I'm already a little bit damaged. I need you to not do this because it hurts, or because I don't have the strength I'd like to have. But we can actually usually exercise through it. Whether we should or not is another thing, right? So let's say, let me give you the typical example of somebody that's starting to get a tendinopathy. Is they get up in the morning, they have their coffee, and they maybe do a little bit of warm up, and then they go start to run. And the first like half mile or mile, oh man, yeah, that's a little tight. That's not feeling great. It's a little sore. And then they start to go, and the pain goes away. And basically what happens is they kind of like, we think it's warming up, but it's actually desensitizing. Like your body's kind of recognize that, hey, you're gonna do this. I've already told you don't do it, but you're gonna do it anyways. The pain kind of goes away. You finish your run, and you finish running like, oh, I guess my foot's okay. I guess my Achilles is okay. And then later in the day, starts to hurt again. And you get up from sitting at your desk and you walk, oh man, that hurts. Once again, that's another message that, hey, like, you're slightly damaged. And then as things get worse, that fraying gets worse, and the body tries to repair. And so it actually sends things to the area. Most notably, like little blood vessels will go to the area where they're not supposed to be, and things get worse. And now you start to run, it hurts, and it hurts the entire time. And that's how you've gotten further. But maybe it doesn't hurt so much just sitting around, like when you're not doing anything. Then the next step is it gets more frayed, and more blood vessels come into the area, and more things get into that area that are trying to heal. And you go for that run. It hurts when you run. It hurts when you start, hurts when you're running, hurts when you stop, and then it'll hurt even just sitting still. And that's how you've basically gone a long way down the wrong track. And so what we really want to do is recognize these things early and intervene early and try and rehabilitate them. And the mistake that a lot of people make, and I know that we're jumping around a little bit, but the mistake a lot of people make is they go instantly to rest. And tendons don't do well with rest, which is kind of a weird way to think about it, because we always say, oh, you're injured, let's rest. Now, if we really think about like what stimulates tendon to either be injured or heal, there's kind of different things. So if we take a tendon, and the thing that injures tendon, actually, let's back it up a little bit.
Okay, I was actually gonna go there. Is how do you even get to a point where you start to see a tendon doing this fraying that you're speaking of? How does it even become injured in the first place?
That's where I wanted to go. So this is perfect. Okay, so it's super complicated. Okay, but I'm gonna make it as easy as possible for us. Is if you have a rope, actually, yeah, let's keep our rope analogy, and it's a really thin rope. Okay, so let's say it's 1 finger length in width, and you're trying to pull something really hard, really heavy with it. You want to be successful with this. And I'll ask you this. This is kind of it's a good physics question. So let's say I've got a 1 finger rope, but I want to pull your trailer with it. Can I do it? Can I pull your trailer with a 1 finger length or 1 finger width rope?
Well, there's a lot that goes into that in terms
there is a lot that goes into it. This is why I'm asking a biomechanist.
That's right. And how much I'm going to pull. I always talk about in my biomechanics class, when we get to something like this, is the guy or girl who pulls a trailer or an airplane from their earlobes or something like that.
Yeah, it's exactly you're going down the exact right path. So what's the answer?
Yeah, because it's impulse. It's not max force. So yeah.
So how do I do it?
slow application of force.
Slow application of force.
Yeah.
Right. So if I've got a really thin tendon
Yeah.
and I pull really slow on it, I can pull a lot.
Mhm.
And same with a rope. But if I do that exact same thing, and we probably all experience this, right? We're like, oh man, I'm trying to pull a car out of something,
Mhm.
and like you're sitting in you got your car attached to something, and you're trying to pull it, and the guy's like, okay, gun it,
Yeah.
and you put it into drive, and you put the gas down, and bam, the rope snaps.
Yeah.
That's the exact wrong way to do it, right? If you take a slow approach, tighten it up slowly, then apply the pressure, the rope doesn't break, right? You were talking about impulse.
Mhm.
So when we exercise, doing the exercises we do, running in particular, there is a lot of impulse.
Mhm.
Every time you land, it's an impulse, right? And even biking. Now, we don't think of it as strong, but, and we'll get into the biking impulse in a little bit, but there is still a little impulse. Like every time you push, your muscles contract and relax, right? So what we want, what ultimately causes the injury is impulse.
Mhm.
And it's impulse on a tendon that is not strong enough to withstand the impulse or to withstand time after time after time after time impulse, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing, right? So, well, why don't we just have a thicker tendon or a more elastic tendon? And that's actually what we do when we do specific exercises. We can actually make the tendon thicker, we can make it stronger, and we can make it more elastic.
Mhm.
And it's one of the reasons that when we train people in endurance sports, we want to titrate up very slowly, right? So over time, our body will respond to impulse as long as it's not too great. And we talked about stress response modeling many times on our show. We want to titrate up really slowly so that the impulses that we put on, or the accumulation of impulses we put on it, is not enough to damage it, but enough to stimulate it to become stronger and thicker and potentially even more elastic.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I love it. And yeah, I like how you were talking about even, do you build up the thickness of the tendon or the elasticity of the tendon? And that there's a lot that goes into that too, because that the muscle is what's making the bone move
Yep.
for the most part. And so if the tendon is too elastic, then the muscle actually has to contract a lot more, which is not necessarily a good thing. And all the same thing with a thicker tendon, you actually have some anatomical interferences that that tendon could have in moving a joint. So that's really interesting.
It's like everything else physiologically. There's a Goldilocks zone,
Hmm.
right? There's the perfect amount of load that you apply that stimulates it to become stronger, but not enough that causes it to be damaged, right? But if we go the exact opposite way, and I already alluded to this, the rest is the worst thing you can do to a tendon. If you rest a tendon, what it ultimately does is it becomes skinnier, right? Because, well, I don't need load. I can remember working in physical therapy many years ago and having patients that were they were old, okay, and now it was our age, but that's okay. But back then when I was young, they were old,
That's right.
but they weren't like very active,
Hmm.
and you could feel like they come in, their Achilles is hurting from just walking, and you
Hmm.
feel it, and the Achilles is like so thin. And it's like, well, if you live a sedentary life, your tendons are going to be thinner,
All right.
right? And it is not just that tendon. I mean, there's some tendons in the body. There's a really interesting one. It's in your foot, and it's called your tibialis posterior tendon. And you're probably familiar with this with some of your biomechanics research. But if you live a sedentary lifestyle, in your fourth decade of life, you basically lose the tendon. It
Mm-hmm.
turns into like, instead of a rope, it turns into a string. It's still there. Like if we were to cut you open, it's still there, but it's literally a string. And we often associate that one with someone who has like their arches are falling, because that's a very important muscle for holding your arch up. So we do know that resting tendons is not good. It's actually super interesting that if someone was to go to like a good sports medicine physician or physical therapist or athletic trainer, and they know what they're doing, somebody comes in with a tendon injury, they're going to start loading them.
Mm.
And they're going to be smart about it. And what they're going to do, they're going to start out loading them with no impulse, right? So we're just going to put tension on it, and tension on it without any bouncing, without any impulse.
Right.
And we can either do really slow contractions, or we can just hold a contraction. So we've talked about this before, called an isometric contraction.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the stimulus you want to start with a tendon if you want to make it, if it's, especially if it's injured and you want to make it stronger. Or let's say you're already putting a lot of impulse because you're running, or or doing a lot like a triathlete would. We can do isometrics where we don't actually put impulse, but we can actually stimulate the tendon to become stronger.
Mm.
But it takes work.
What's that?
It takes work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it took work to injure it to begin with.
And that's the thing. And the one other thing I was going to talk about with tendons, and I know I gave the rope analogy, and I want to give one more analogy, and it's one that really fits into like the triathlete mindset. And it can happen in the shoulder, like the rotator cuff, happens at the knee, happens basically many of our joints. It's not just the pulling. So we talked about the pulling and that causing shearing or causing tearing, but also a lot of times a tendon will be going over a bone.
Mm-hmm.
So even at our Achilles, we have you have your calcaneus, you have your heel bone, and you have your Achilles tendon kind of attached like this, where my palm is. Well, there, when I bend and I flex like this, the bone can actually irritate the tendon,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll actually scrape the tendon. And tendons don't do well with like a shearing force across from the bone. And so one of the things we want to do is try and, like, when we're strengthening our tendons, is avoid like that shearing force across, especially early on. And so that's just something to kind of keep in mind. It's not just like you're just keep pulling. Mm-hmm. It's that you might be pulling, and now you've created almost like an angle, mm-hmm. Where now the tendon is pulling on an angle that it's not necessarily the most biomechanically efficient. Does that make sense too?
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because actually something you said earlier just got me thinking. I hadn't thought about this before, but when you injure a tendon, the muscle has, tendon at one end and a tendon at the other end.
Yep.
But you're not likely to injure both tendons, at the same time. I mean,
very rare that you injure both tendons at the same time. It's almost always one, mm-hmm. and it's almost always the one where the tendon actually has a curve to it. Mm-hmm. So if you think about like your rotator cuff, and so it comes from your shoulder and then goes and basically takes a right angle onto your humerus here, mm-hmm. right? Well, it injures right where the curve is, and it's because we have bone from underneath that's creating a shearing force. Mm-hmm. It was literally just pulling straight. Once again, if we think about our analogy of pulling your trailer, if I was to take a block of wood and put it as on that rope, and I pulled, you can see it would create friction, mm-hmm. on that block of wood, and would potentially do damage to the rope. Mm-hmm. But it's an interesting phenomenon here, and this is total biomechanics stuff. But those curves help us biomechanically as well, because it helps create levers, right? Or pulleys, which have biomechanical advantage. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's not that it was a mistake that we were made this way. There's biomechanical advantage to it. We just got to be careful with how we ultimately load them. Yeah.
No, these bony protuberances that the tendons wrap around are so important, especially in, positions that are, in extreme, because you're strong. Like if you tested out the strength of someone, they're usually not strongest in this position. They're usually strongest in some, intermediate position.
Yeah.
And, but you do have a weak point in that range. And so when people who do strength training, they know they have the sticking point, and there's a weak point within a range of motion. And that's usually where the mechanical advantage that you speak of, that really helps in terms of getting joints out of starting positions, like in, fully extended positions. But then that mechanical advantage goes away for a little bit. And so then you have a little bit of a weak point. There's a lot more to it, but and then you have a strong point where the muscle is the strongest. So it's sort of a funny phenomena.
Now we can add another piece to this, which is also fun. is that if you keep going, let's say you just keep going, you don't care, it hurts, you don't care, you take Tylenol,
Okay.
you do whatever you can to decrease your pain, and you just keep going.
Mhm.
The interesting thing is, in most of like endurance sports, you don't tear your tendon.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't rupture.
Okay.
Rupture tendons with high impulses, sprinting, maximum weightlifting, like 1 RM
Mm-hmm.
weightlifting, jumping maximally. But what ultimately happens is the body responds really interesting in an interesting way, and that it calcifies the tendon.
Mm.
So it actually puts down calcium in the tendon, which, think about it, like the body's response is, hey, like whatever I have here is not strong enough for what you're asking me to do. So what's stronger than this tendon is, well, I'm going to put down basically bone.
Mm-hmm.
And this becomes really a problem with
Mm.
people. And because the treatment for calcific tendinopathies is really rough.
Mm.
It's like either surgical removals, we can do shockwave therapies. There's things we can do, but it becomes really difficult. So, word to the wise: listen to your tendons, and don't just keep trying to mask the pain. And a lot of people do this. All you have to do is read a few blogs about people and the amount of like drugs they're taking for pain in their
Yeah.
tendons. And the drugs, they don't make the tendon any better. That's
Mm-hmm.
another thing. Like, and well, they might, there might be like a tiny little bit of the research that says they might, but in
Mm-hmm.
general, they don't,
Okay.
especially if you keep putting those impulses on them.
Mm. All right. So this is interesting, and this is obviously I love this point because if you're not paying attention and you're masking the pain, you could lead to more damage. But maybe even talk a little bit about how do you diagnose a injury and how do you even diagnose this calcification of the tendon?
Well, let's talk about the diagnosing the tendon injury first.
Okay.
And I kind of already went through this as far as like if you're a runner or doing something, if you're hurting and you warm up and it goes away, and then later in the day it comes back, like you just kind of like going down the stairs where it comes back, you have the starting of this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, when you get to the point where you have a calcific tendinopathy, it hurts all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it literally, like, you straighten your leg and like, oh, like that's, and there's a gradation between those. Um, and the truth of the matter is with the tendinopathy, when it starts, if you keep doing what you're doing, and if you keep adding a little bit more load, it's never going to get better.
Okay.
You have to change what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember I said the tendons don't like rest? They don't. But what they don't like even more is more and more load when they're injured.
So you got to find that sweet spot.
You got to find the sweet spot. And in general, and this is just a word to the wise for everybody. And man, a lot of physical therapists and athletic trainers aren't going to like me telling you this, because this is like the secret sauce of fixing tendons. Is you back the impulse off and you load the tendon slowly with heavy weight.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, your Achilles,
Mm-hmm.
you could load it really slow with, say you're doing a calf raise, right? You load it with, I don't even know, 100 pounds. Like you say, you're holding 100 pounds, or like you got the gym and you get the thing where you can push up with 100 pounds, and you do it really slow, or you do it even static where you don't move at all, you're just holding it.
Mm-hmm.
Tendon will respond. And it will respond by making itself stronger, because tendons, once again, they respond to tension way better than impulse.
Okay.
Right. And so that's kind of like the magic sauce to this. And now, once again, finding the exact exercise to do, honestly, it doesn't make that much of a difference as long as you're doing heavy load to that tendon without the impulse. So think of it, it's a thin rope, and you're trying to pull that as gingerly as possible without doing damage to that thin rope. Now we can get into like sets and reps and things like that, but and there's lots of you can find that on the internet. There's lots of different ways you could do this, but in general, it needs to be heavy weight and slow.
Interesting.
And
So is there any pain sensation during this? Is that
yes,
something? Okay.
yes, that's the thing. It hurts when you're doing it, and what you want to look for is about a 2 to 3 out of 10 pain.
Mm.
That kind of lets you know you're in the right zone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's gonna hurt to do it. Now the really cool thing is, and this is some really, it's like 4 or 5 year old research now, is and this is out of Australia, this group that does a ton of work on tendons. They've kind of found that if you do this, I'm giving you the magic, 5 sets of 45-second holds with high weight, you can actually remove your pain. Pain.
Okay.
So this is a little bit dangerous though, right?
Yeah, right.
Because if you want to go for that run, you could do this and it won't hurt to run.
Mm.
So it's kind of a weird thing, but it will strengthen your tendon, but it will actually take away your pain. And it's actually one of the ways you know that you have a tendinopathy is if that works and it takes the pain away, then you know it's your tendon.
Mm.
It's a crazy
just
little
turning
thing.
off that signal to the brain.
Yep.
And then the brain is not adjusting, and so you run the risk of doing more damage.
Yeah.
But,
But once again, let's say, I don't know, it's the last race of the year.
mm-hmm.
And like, after this, I'm going to concentrate. I'm going to get my tendons better. I'm going to load them appropriately. And so the morning, it's usually lasts about 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So like right before you get, into the water, let's say it was your shoulder, you did like your 5 times 45 seconds with 2-minute rest in between each one, by the way. And your pain should go away.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to get through your event. And, that's when we would use this. And John, the truth of the matter is this came out of like high level sports where like, if we were to once again look at like professional athletes, they're playing with tendon injuries all season long.
Mm-hmm.
It's just part of it. Right. And so how do they manage it so they can keep playing? Mm-hmm. That's one of the kind of the things they do is they do this 5 by 45 second holds. And, especially when it's getting near the end of the season, playoffs in particular, in high level sports, like we're playing no matter what. I'd rather play pain-free than play with pain.
Yeah. Interesting. No, that's really, really neat to hear. So do you want to get down the rehab path or?
Let's talk about prevention.
Okay.
First.
Okay.
Because, obviously we want to prevent these things. So then we need to know, we've talked a little bit about what causes them, but the number one thing that we find in the literature is it's not, and the thing a lot of people want to go to is, oh, my running technique is poor, or my swimming technique is poor, or, oh, my cycling, I need a better position on my bike. Like I need to spend hundreds of dollars on bike fits. And yes, those things can have a little effect. But the research really points to it truly is load management. It's increasing load too quickly. Because the hard part is this, is the cardiovascular system responds relatively quickly to training increases. The muscular system does it really fast, but the tendon system is slow. And so, we've talked a lot about load in the past, 10% per week. Is these kind of numbers we're looking at, but it gets to a point where if you just keep 10% per week, eventually you're running 100 miles a week, and that's just too damn much. Right. So you have to slowly increase load, and increase load with duration and intensity, or sorry, should be actually one or the other. Where we really run into problems is we increase volume and intensity at the same time. So tendons don't do well with these, big increases. And so when we talk about this, and we've talked about this before, is when you're really thinking about triathlon, thinking about it for the long game, right? Not like, oh man, I got this race coming up in a month, I'm going to trash myself until I get to the race. And because it's going to give me best bang for my buck. And yes, cardiovascularly you're going to get strong, your muscles are going to get stronger, but your tendons are going to fall behind. And they are kind of the weak link for a lot of people. Now this is the worst part, and nobody wants to hear this, but genetics play a huge role. Some people genetically have very robust tendons. They actually, there's genetic markers for collagen synthesis that are higher in these people. and they never get tendinopathies, right? But that's probably not you, sorry, because it's actually
Right,
a
right.
really small percentage. And you know what we call those people, John?
What's up?
Professional athletes.
Oh, there you go.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
Like there's been a bunch of work on this and looking at like high level athletes and their collagen synthesis rates
Mhm.
and their tendon thickness, and they become so much more robust because they recover, their tendons recover quicker. It's not even
Mhm.
about their muscles, their
Right.
tendons do. So they can increase their load more and more and more. And we run into issues where well, let's pick on somebody, where Lionel Sanders goes and says, I'm going to train with the Norwegians and do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And they're high load guys.
Right.
Well, you don't have the same genetics, right? And or maybe he does, but we often do this as we watch podcasts, we listen to what the pros are doing, and like, well, they're doing this, like I should, I got to get myself to do this. Or John Mercer trains 20 hours a week. Well, if I want to beat John, I better train 21 hours a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And we fall victim to this. And I've fallen victim to it many times where you're feeling good. It's like, man, I'm just going to do one more session this week, and I shouldn't, right? Because my tendons aren't ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also fall victim to not listening to our body,
Yeah.
right? And that run where it's like, and these first 2 miles, it's really hurting. But on my calendar it says a 10-mile run today,
Mm-hmm.
and that 2 miles, I start feeling better. I'm good, right? And then I dug myself deeper into the hole,
No.
right? And so I think that preventing it is understanding load management, and then understanding when it starts to happen, how to you need to stop doing the impulse and still train, right? But let's train the tendon now by increasing load on the tendon in a concerted fashion where it's high load but no impulse.
Got it. So how does the prevention strategy change, or does it change with age?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's such little research on this.
Mhm.
Like, I can't find really good research on this, because we don't know what comes first. Like is the weakened tendon happening because we get old, or because tendons do get weaker as you get old,
Mm-hmm.
or is it the fact that we are a little bit too sedentary,
Yeah.
right? And so when we look at like masters athletes that have been active their entire life, their
Mm-hmm.
tendons are thicker, right? And if you start off with thicker tendons, you're going to be more robust as you get older, and they do degrade. Even if you're older, they do degrade. And so one of the things that I was trying to convince my students of, they're all in their 20s. I'm like, start to think about this stuff now.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
build up your resiliency now. And there's tons of evidence to support this. If you're more robust in your 20s and 30s, when you're 60, 50 and 60, you'll be more robust.
Mm-hmm.
So the truth of the matter is that you kind of got to know yourself, right? If you are injury prone, right, which I tend to be, it probably pays dividends to really spend time strengthening your tendons and understanding that, what, you're going to gain for me, like I have to gain my cardiovascular fitness in a smart way,
Mm-hmm.
like not a ton of running.
Right.
I need to do the least amount of running possible,
Mm-hmm.
and
Minimum effective dose.
minimum effective dose, and then maximum effective dose for
Yeah.
for my tendons.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Like I've known this stuff for a long time, but it's really taken a lot of injury on my part to do it for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to get my tendons as strong as possible, and not just the tendons that have been historically a problem, but all of them.
Yeah.
It's funny. I sit around. One of the things I do when I brush my teeth is I stand on one foot.
Mm-hmm.
I just hold. I'm like, well, I'm here anyways for 2 minutes. I'm going to stand here,
All right.
and sometimes my students don't watch this, so it's okay.
Yeah.
I'll be teaching. I'll be behind the lectern. I'll be standing on one foot.
Okay.
right? Because I'm just loading my tendon.
Yeah,
I'm here
right,
anyways,
right.
right?
Mhm,
There's there was a it was a it was a presentation I watched, and one of the things they're talking about is like, what do you do at when you're in a meeting? Isometrics, like,
mhm.
right? Put your foot on the leg of the chair and pull.
Yeah, right.
It'll keep you awake,
Mhm,
and you're loading your tendons.
mhm.
Like it's kind of funny to think about that, like how much time we sit in meetings and
Yeah,
on Zoom calls, and
yeah,
I could be, and I'm not doing it right now. I could be doing some tendon loading, literally just sitting here,
right, right.
and it's and I don't, but I should,
Mhm.
right? But it's easier if you're not the one talking.
Yeah, it's tough, but a healthy tendon is so important as we get older,
Yeah,
and tendon elasticity, the ability to be stretched and recoil is so important to performance, from running, running mostly, but biking as well, and even swimming. And that ability for that tendon to stretch and recoil back to its original length is so important. And yeah, so healthy tendon is not only important for from an injury perspective, but from a performance perspective.
yeah. The one other thing I wanted to add, and we've talked a little bit about this a long time ago, so we'll throw it in again. There is a nutritional aspect to
I,
this.
I was going to ask you if you wanted to go down that path.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
talk
I do.
about how, from even from a nutrition end, how you tackle a healthy tendon.
So the thing that's it's the big buzz these days is collagen,
Mhm,
right? And actually eating more collagen. I know we can get collagen in powders, and it's difficult, especially if you're vegetarian, to eat collagen, because it mostly comes from beef hoofs and
mhm,
bones, but bone broths are another one.
yep,
But really, it comes down to is, are you meeting your protein needs for the day?
mhm,
And one thing is, why I wanted to talk about this, because you brought up aging. And one of the things that we do know for sure is that as we age, we synthesize less protein. So we need more protein.
mm,
And then if we add in the fact we're beating ourselves up constantly,
mhm,
the protein levels that we get are not enough for the most
mhm,
part. And we've had some nutrition people on talking about this, and really prioritizing protein in particular, and people are going to hate me, but uh, meat-based or
mhm,
animal-based proteins, because the animal-based proteins have the full spectrum of amino acids.
mhm,
Um, because ultimately, if you're short on amino acids or you're short on protein, you're not going to be able to produce as much tendon.
right.
Right? You could be stimulating it all you want, but if the building blocks aren't there,
Mhm,
and it comes from protein, um, you're you're going to be behind.
mhm,
So one of the things that I do is every meal is a protein. Protein is the priority first,
mhm.
and I try to get 30 to 40 grams of protein at every meal, and I try 4 times a day
Oh, that's great.
to get that. And that's what the research says we
Mhm,
should be doing. And as we get older, more.
yeah.
And and once again, the research really points to that most endurance athletes, especially masters endurance athletes, don't get anywhere near that. And
Mhm,
if we make it even uh, a little bit more specific, women in particular
mhm,
have a very hard time, and it's a social thing, a social psychologic thing, that big protein meals are bad. Um, but if you're in this business and you want to have healthy tendons, you have to do it.
yeah.
The thing that I'll do, I supplement with a full spectrum amino acid. If I know that, well, let's say we had pizza tonight,
Mhm,
right? Well, I know there's not a lot of protein in the pizza.
mhm,
Even if I get like meat on it, there's still not that much.
right.
So then I'll supplement with an amino acid, a full spectrum amino acid on top, to
Mhm,
make sure I'm getting and then just so people know, amino acids are pieces of protein,
mhm,
and we have essential and non-essential amino acids. But basically, you can just take them directly. You don't actually have to take the directly from food. I prefer to get it from food, but if I don't, I have it kind of like an insurance plan. I have
mhm.
amino acids that I take.
Well, I love the broth idea in terms of what to eat. And, we're moving into the fall here, so, broth based soups are really
But you got to have the bones in there.
that's right.
It
That's
has to
right.
be bone broth. It can't just be like, oh, I get some chicken stock and
That's
put it
right.
in there. The other thing that I think it's a really important to understand is that one of the best sources is dairy and the
Hmm.
protein from dairy.
Yeah.
And whey protein is ubiquitous with bodybuilders, right? Like, oh, I got to get your whey protein. I think it's just as important for endurance athletes,
Yeah.
if not more important for endurance
Hmm.
athletes. And so same thing, like I have protein drinks all the time. I get chocolate milk, protein
Yeah.
chocolate.
So there you go.
I drink it all the time.
Hmm.
And because I want to get that number. And the other thing that's important to understand is you can't get your daily protein needs in one shot. Let's say
Hmm.
you want to get 160 grams of protein.
Right.
I could eat a big steak and have 160 grams of protein in one shot, but your body gets saturated and it can only take in, actually metabolize so much.
Hmm.
So you have to pulse it throughout the day.
Right.
One last piece is if you have like 10 grams here, 10 grams here, 10 grams here, it doesn't do it. You actually have to pulse it.
Hmm.
And especially as you get older, the pulsing of it becomes even more important. So like when you get into like your fifth and sixth decade in life, we're looking at like 40 grams of in each meal to kind of get you to the point where you need to be.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I was actually just listening to a podcast on protein for endurance athletes, and the amount of protein is far more than what people have done in the past. So it's almost double the regular recommendation for protein.
And
1.6 times your body mass. I mean,
it's a lot.
that's a lot.
And I just like, seriously, I don't even worry about that. Because if
Yeah,
you have too much,
you can't store it. It's not.
you
It's
can't
not
store it,
like
right?
it's not like fat that you can store your fat. No, it's protein. You're going to just break
It
it
can
down.
get turned into glucose, and then
Yeah,
that glucose could
yeah,
get turned into fat. I mean, but
hmm,
that takes
yeah,
a lot of energy to do
yeah,
it. But really, having too much is not a problem.
hmm,
Your nitrogen balance can get a little
yeah.
bit off, but
That's
it's
a lot of
usually
protein. Yeah.
that's a lot of protein. And I know like historically people, oh, it's bad for your kidneys
Hmm.
to have too much protein. The evidence doesn't support that
Yeah.
unless you have kidney disease.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah,
So I think I'm gonna have some ice cream tonight then.
I'm gonna have some yogurt.
Oh man, well, we covered a lot of ground here. This is great, from some anatomy and physiology to injury mechanisms to rehab procedure or rehab techniques, and now nutrition.
Yeah, but it all goes together, right? Like
Well,
that's the thing. Oftentimes you read an article and it's very specific about this one little thing,
hmm,
and this is part of like being a clinician. And like for me, being a clinician and dealing with
yeah,
athletes and dealing with injured athletes is it has to be holistic and it has to
yeah,
be the whole picture.
hmm,
And it's not just one thing. It's
hmm,
it's it's many things. And you know, it's an interesting thing that I've obviously worked with a lot of athletes and a lot of physicians throughout the years, and the physicians that I work with are they've been historically really good about, hey, you got to load your tendons, you got to do this, but they never talk about the nutrition side.
hmm, right,
And it's like, well, that's an important piece. Or they don't talk about the load management side,
yeah,
and it has to go all together.
yeah. No, that's the tough part, I think, of your area is you need to know everything from all the areas I've mentioned, and psychology as well.
Well, we didn't even get into the
Yeah, that's
neuroplasticity
right.
and pain modulation,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
we could talk about it one time. But one of the really interesting future areas of research is getting into why a tendon still hurts when it's better.
Mm.
Like when we
Hmm.
look at it histologically, we look at it under MRI, we look at it
Hmm.
what it's healed, but it still hurts.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of work being done on like actually the psychology of pain,
Hmm. Yeah. Right. Right.
and how to help people through that.
Hmm.
And and part of it actually is for clinicians is actually using appropriate terminology
Mm.
and not saying things like itis.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
anyways,
wow. This is great. Well, if you start going this path, we're going to go for another hour. So,
we better stop. You got to get your ice cream, and I got to have I got to get my 40 grams of protein here.
I got to put everything in the car for the race tomorrow too.
Oh yeah, you do. You probably not even packed yet.
No, I mean, I got stuff in I always keep my tri bag ready to go. That's my go bag. So, Wow,
All
this
right.
is great. Thank you for sharing all that. I mean, you've got a wealth of knowledge in this area, so this is great.
You're welcome. And if you want to send your tuition dollars in,
Yeah,
please
right.
send it
Right.
to the evidence-based triathlete.
That's right. All right, maybe we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, for sure you'll see me tomorrow. We'll be out
Okay.
there cheering people on. Yeah, I'm hoping, like I said, if the wind is decent, I'm going to try and get a quick swim in at the lake. I figure if I'm going to drive all the way to the lake, I got to get a
Gotta
swim
do
in.
something. Yeah.
I got to do something. Now, I could just socialize. You know me,
Yeah.
I could talk.
That's right. That's right.
So, are you going to
Awesome.
be at so you're going to be hanging out afterwards too, right?
Yep.
At
Yep.
the Las Vegas Triathlon
Yep.
Club tent.
Yep.
You'll be there. I'll be there. We'll sign some autographs for
That's
people if
right.
they want an autograph signed. We'll both be there for autograph signing.
There you go. All
Okay.
right. Good talking.
Hey, have a great weekend.
You too.